the image that most travelers in the West, if you could see it like this, still have of Africa when it comes to safety is one along these lines. They think of potholes in the runway. This is actually an aircraft taxiing out to a runway at a major, or not a major, but at an intercontinental airport. But again, this is a few years ago. Or people think of this, a broken down aircraft at another intercontinental airport in Africa with loads of what seem to be random bystanders pushing an aircraft off the runway. But again, this is a few years ago. Or people think of this. This is the engine compartment of a fire truck at a big international airport. And as you may see, there's a particular item missing in this engine compartment. John, I don't know if you notice it, but it's the engine which is actually missing. But again, this is a few years ago. These things are increasingly becoming exceptions. And it's not to say that you won't find situations like this in Africa anymore, but it's remarkable, like John said in his opening words this morning, how many great strides have been made forward over the past 5 to 10 years in particular. But nonetheless, what you see here is the perception. That is the image a lot of people outside Africa have of Africa when it comes to aviation safety. Now, I showed you the perception. Let me show you some of the facts. These are the facts. Don't worry so much about all the numbers in this screen, particularly focus on the dark blue ones and look at Africa. John mentioned it this morning briefly, but this was the first time, 2016, when Africa, when it came to jet aircraft, outperformed almost all regions in the world with 0 hull losses in Africa. And I think John asked for a round of applause this morning. I want to repeat that because we have to celebrate successes in Africa as well. Because I think we do that very badly. We very badly celebrate our successes. Now, first and foremost, African governments and operators should be complimented on this impressive progress over the past years. But it's easy to forget that every day, thousands of professionals in Africa work really hard to make sure that aviation is the safest form of transport also in Africa. And they don't do so because they expect special recognition, but they do so because they act in ways that promote safety, because they know our industry depends on it. It is because it's the right thing to do. Now, the progress over the past years has been inspired and supported by impressive work from institutions such as ICAO and IATA, and also you have safety support providers such as the US Safe Sky for Africa program or the European Aviation Safety Agency, and also hopefully as a foundation we've made our small contribution to this. It was mostly the so-called Abuja Declaration in 2012 which sparked this leap forwards, and that was an initiative from IATA. But we have to work very hard, of course, to sustain these figures, because yes, this is fantastic performance over 2016, but it's not a given that 2017 and the years that follow will look exactly like this. So it will require great dedication of the industry and the governments to this, to find structural solutions for that. And as a foundation, we're working on plans to tackle part of those challenges actually from here in Rwanda. But perhaps more about that tomorrow. Now, this graph speaks of the jet aircraft. Unfortunately, when it comes to turboprop operations, the picture is still slightly different. This is a view of the turboprop operations. And you can see again, if you look at the dark blue figures in Africa, unfortunately, when it comes to turboprop operations, the figure is much higher than almost any region in the world. Now, a question we quite often get as a foundation is, does this mean turboprop aircraft are more unsafer than jet aircraft? No, that's not the case. If you look at this graph, you will see that it's a graph of some of the fairly major airports in this region. And you can see that many of those airports, it's a bit difficult in the colors to see, but the ones with the red dot on it have no published instrument approach. This basically means that the aircraft have no vertical guidance, so they have no way of knowing where the terrain is, and they have no automatic systems in place to stay clear of obstacles. Basically, what you can say is a lot of those strips where turboprops operate have far fewer facilities, and it is that what means that those destinations pose a higher risk. And I think it was Sabine this morning who mentioned the importance of risk management as an airport as you try to attract new passengers. This is why that figure with turboprops is different, Because in those early stages of route development, aircraft flying into those airports usually are turboprop aircraft. They play a pioneering role often in the development of routes in the very early stages. So it has nothing to do with the aircraft being a turboprop or a jet engine aircraft. It has to do with the type of operations they perform and the facilities they find at those airports. Another positive fact about aviation safety over the past decade, I would say, in Africa. And this particularly relates to what is called the in-flight broadcasting procedure. This is a frequency 126.9, which the IATA carriers use in those regions where they think or where they have experienced that the radio control by the tower is not sufficient. They've set up the IFBP answer to that. Basically, they transmit blind on this frequency, and they say, good afternoon, KLM 569 inbound to Dar es Salaam. I'm from the Netherlands, so I like to use KLM as an example, of course. My position is so-and-so, I'm heading for Dar es Salaam, and this is my flight level. And they do that because, again, in those areas, they only have usually HF, high-frequency communication, and no VHF frequency communication, making it very difficult to even hear air traffic controllers sometimes. In 2002, if you look at the map, it's a bit difficult to see, but you see Africa in the middle, and the black line is the IFBP region, so the region in which those airlines used that frequency in 2002. But if you look and skip ahead to 2013, you can see that large parts of that area have been taken out. In other words, the airlines, IATA Airlines, have seen that in those areas, in those 15 countries, the communication with the towers and with the area control has improved so much that they don't have to use the IFBP frequency anymore. So again, a good improvement. Another fact, if you like, instead of a perception. So with all these facts, all these improvements in safety over the past 5 to 10 years, here I think is the first opportunity, because John asked us to look for opportunities, not so much for challenges, but what are the opportunities that we see? And I would say the first opportunity is we can and should set up a public relations campaign to talk about this progress. Because we all know it, perhaps, in this industry, but we do a very bad job, I think, at selling this internationally, letting the rest of the world know how much progress has been made over the past years in Africa. And I spoke to John, I think it was Monday evening, about pragmatic ways of cooperation, because yes, we cannot maybe employ as an industry a very expensive PR agency, but I liked your example you gave of making sort of a barter agreement with, I think, Grant Thornton in your case, to still get some data from reliable sources. Because ideally, of course, this message is not a message we give, because then people might say, well, they're talking for their own, they're preaching for their own parish. So what if we can find a good university or a good set of universities, like the Cape Town Business School in South Africa, to help us with this PR campaign? I also spoke about it with Dico, who's speaking after me, I think. We were together 2 weeks ago, I think, in Johannesburg, and we said, you know, we have to find a way as an industry to get that PR message out there and let the world know of this tremendous progress. Now again, all of this doesn't mean that there's no more work to be done, because also when you're healthy, you can't say, I stop looking after my health. You still have to, you know, stay fit and perform, in that case, sometimes particular sports to stay fit. In relation to route development, a lot of it, I think Sabine mentioned it this morning, is about route forecasts, financial evaluations. I think it's on the screen here actually. Information on catchment area characteristics, airport facilities, price incentives. For me, this is all new. I'm from safety. I learned a lot this morning, actually, Sabine. Thank you very much for that, on route development. But I think there's also an opportunity for us as an industry again, and specifically when it comes to safety. Because in those financial evaluations, safety costs that directly impact on the profitability of a route might be something we could look at as an industry. Because there are quite a number of areas still where we could score significant progress in our efforts to help reduce the cost of developing a new route. And there are two main areas, I would say, where those take place. So these are safety issues that directly eat into the route revenue for a particular airport. One of them is bird strikes. most bird strikes stay well under the insurance excess, which means an airline cannot claim their small bird strikes with an insurance, and it comes directly out of their pocket sometimes. And that is something which is costly and will not, if you look at Sabine's presentation about calculated risks and trying to mitigate those risks, this could be an area where we, as a brother and sisterhood of aviation, could look into. The other one is ground damage. This is a truck which is driven into a wingtip of an aircraft. Again, quite often those smaller damages are not covered under insurance, and they more or less eat directly into the profitability of a route. Now, a small sideline opportunity, not really a major opportunity, but I think another opportunity, John, for improving the perception of African aviation may exist. This is a picture you can take at many airports in Africa. In fact, this is one of the biggest airports in Africa. I won't name the airport. But you see discarded fire trucks, you see discarded planes right next to the runway, right next to the apron, which in the perception of the average passenger will not really give him a very comfortable feeling, because you see aircraft that might have crashed years ago or weeks ago, but still, they are there. And perhaps here we can learn from the government of Rwanda, funnily enough. In 2008, 2009, they implemented a program here where all primary school children and all secondary school children have to learn about entrepreneurship. The government of Rwanda said, we want to make sure that all youngsters in our community know about how to start up your own business. And I picked up a very interesting book here at a bookshop called Ikireza, which looks into how that entrepreneurship program actually worked and works in Rwanda. And the book is titled The Orderly Entrepreneur. Perhaps a small contribution we can make in the aviation industry is working on orderly airports. Because in the end, if we organize for business, we also usually are better organized for safety. And again, that's the main aim of the foundation. So this is not a major issue, but I think it's nice to see. For example, in Uganda, I recently noticed that they have actually cleared away quite some wreckages, if you like, from aircraft. It's a small thing, but it helps with that perception. Let's go back to another fact, if I can, not a perception. If you look at some of the bigger economic growth engines of Africa, and I liked this one called Next, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Africa, and Tanzania, you can ask yourself, if you're developing a new route, are those countries looking well after the assets that you would bring there as an airline? Are they safeguarding their assets? In other words, are they looking at risk management? Again, the point from this morning. And again, there's a positive answer. If you look at these same countries, don't worry so much about the details of this graph. The blue line depicts the global average of the implementation of ICAO standards. So that's roughly, you could say, 70%, and then goes down a bit on 8 critical areas of safety oversight by governments. If you would have taken this graph a few years ago, all these countries you see now would have been well below this line. But you see now in many areas, more and more areas actually, the performance of government and safety oversight is improving. So possibly and likely there's a good relation between the absence of accidents in the past few years, particularly last year, and the safety oversight by the government. And again, it starts to become almost a habit, John, I think, but we have to again compliment the government of Rwanda. They've just had their ICAO audit a couple of weeks ago, and their results will be published in the next few weeks. And then you'll see that Rwanda, on almost all areas, scores well above the blue line, well above the global average. So maybe another round of applause then for the Rwanda CEA, I guess, and the Rwandan government. Because again, if we don't learn how to celebrate as an industry those successes, I think we miss out on an opportunity. The next opportunity I would like to bring to your attention is something also Guillermo Waka spoke about this morning, which is the area of human resources. Over the past 2 decades or so, governments in Africa have worked really hard to improve the access to primary and secondary schools in Africa, driven by the Millennium Development Goals. You can see there, number 2, this was from 2000 to 2015, was to achieve good access of children to primary and secondary schools. And more recently, governments worldwide have committed to this set of sustainable development goals. And these actually go a step further. So instead of just speaking about the access to education, you can see that Development goal number 4 speaks of the quality of education. So whereas a lot of governments have improved the access to education, the next 15 years basically is about improving the quality of education, which we need because we need a lot of new people in our industry to accommodate the growth of which Marcel, I think, spoke this morning as well. The figures you gave, Marcel, about the growth foreseen in the industry. What is important to realize that only 6% of the eligible youngsters, you could say, in Africa, have access to tertiary education, education after their legal school age. So what's all this got to do with aviation and aviation safety? It's important to remember that only part of these 6% of youngsters, if you like, have access to these kind of skills, the 4 C's: critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity. And these are the 4 C's we want our future aviators to have. And when we speak about future aviators, you quite often see a graph like this, which is from ICAO. It speaks of the people we need in the next so many years to accommodate this growth. This is not just for Africa, this is for a global picture. But what I find interesting is this speaks of pilots and technicians. But what about the dispatchers, airline marketing people, air traffic controllers, safety managers, government safety inspectors? And Sabine, you'll be pleased to say, I'm also mentioning here, what about the new route developers? Where would these people have to come from? How do we get those people into our industry to accommodate and to realize actually that tremendous growth? Now, I'm not saying that we have to do the job of the Ministry of Education in Tanzania or Rwanda, but it does present us yet again, I think, with another opportunity to create ways to have our next generation of aviation professionals, and hopefully Adefunke, where have you gone? I think also, there you are, particularly I hope to bring more girls into the industry. That would be very nice. We spoke about that last year, I think it was. And we would want them to get those 4 C's as skills. Maybe not even because we want to make a better society, but because we need people with those 4 C's, with those skills in our industry. And again, we can perhaps think, and that's the opportunity, I think, of creating cooperation agreement with universities all over the world, or in Africa, between African universities, or create mentorship programs to bring those people online. That brings me to opportunity number 3. I was always taught that you should only trust the statistics you falsified yourself. So here's one of those statistics. The number 19. This is basically the median age of the African, if he or she were to exist at the moment. This is the age of Africa, if you like. So there's a tremendous amount of very young people in Africa who we hopefully will partially get into our industry. And again, this presents an opportunity because this is a young population and the professionals we have to train into our industry and keep in our industry are young and dynamic people. And they're also sometimes angry. Why are they angry? They're keen to move forward. And nowadays, with growing economies, they really start to get opportunities for choice in employment, which is something new. If you would have come to Africa probably 15 or 20 years ago when I started my career, those opportunities were far fewer in Africa. As a youngster, you were very glad to have a job. Nowadays, in some of the middle-income countries, young people start to get this choice. In other words, if we don't capture them in our industries, other sectors will. There's a famous economist in Ghana called George Aitai, and he has coined a very interesting term, the cheetah generation. This cheetah generation is a generation of youngsters in Africa between 25 and 35 years of age. Again, many of them had opportunities which their parents never had. They can carefully start to make career choices. So if being an air traffic controller is no longer interesting, why don't I join an IT company? Again, something you wouldn't have seen probably 20 years ago in Africa. And the hippos, the other side, all they see is basically problems. They look back at the past a lot and the colonial times, and they see the state as the solution for basically everything. The cheetahs, on the other hand, look at private opportunities. What opportunities can I realize myself in the industry? And we have to keep this new, young, and slightly angry group of people, I think, in mind when we're recruiting and trying to retain new staff into our industry. Now, these are some of the cheetahs we've come across in our programs over the past years, from varying countries. Some of you might actually recognize some of the people there. Some Rwandan cheetahs we've worked with. I won't name them because it will take too much time. Another line of cheetahs again. And these are people we still stay in touch with, and we try where possible to involve them in our programs. So we try to make them a trainer, for example. The lady here on the far left bottom side is Gloria Bitebekezi. She nowadays is one of our trainers from Uganda on airport wildlife management. So we do our best to get some of those cheetahs in our work, but I think we all have to work harder to get them into all of your work, in Manish's industry, in Sabine's industry, to get those cheetahs in. Now, to you, this may look like an ordinary $50 bill. But to me, this is the story of cheetahs in our industry, in aviation. I got this note in Entebbe, Uganda, on the 14th of November, 2013. This particular note, I took a picture of it. It was aviation cheetah, he was in one of the previous slides, Daniel Wanjala, who gave me this bill. And he said, I've been part of what AviAssist is trying to do, I've been part of promoting safety, and I think this is such a good opportunity for cheetahs like myself. I want to hand over, I want to pay forward that opportunity. So he gave this bill, and ever since is transferring $50 a year to the foundation, because he says this is where cheetahs should have a chance. And of course it's nice for me because it's safety, but I'm sure there are similar opportunities for you when it comes to network development and route development. It's a society actually now which we have called Friends of AviAssist, which are professionals from the Netherlands, from UK, but equally from Africa. And also we now start to get corporate Friends of AviAssist, like Safari Link in Kenya, who are keen to access the resources that we, but hopefully increasingly also with you, can mobilize. So yeah, of course, in the end, this $50 bill is what we're all after. But increasingly in Africa, it's not the only thing. Increasingly, we move away, it seems, from a pure focus on salary. If you look at the top motivators of professionals, once they have a reasonable salary in place, all of a sudden things like challenging work, recognition, employee involvement, making constant progress in your career become relevant. And again, not 20 years ago, because the only focus then was to get a salary, but increasingly it is a focus. Now, we know that we have those cheetahs coming up in the industry. We have to motivate and captivate them, not just along salary lines, but also along those lines to get them into our industry. Now, training all these people is perhaps a bit scary, because it may mean you're actually training your successor. But if we want to keep those cheetahs or get them into our industry to start with and then keep them, I think we have to learn to step over that fear. This, and we've heard him a few times actually today, and we've heard from Guido Mawaka that he's not always correct, but this is what a very famous aviator says about it. I'm sure you recognize one of the people in this picture. Presume it's not one of the stewardesses. Richard Branson, we've heard, of course, he should have listened to Girma when it came to Virgin Nigeria, but he chose to do differently. But this is a quote from him which we really like at the foundation. The trick is to train people well enough so they can leave, then treat them well enough so they don't want to leave. Right, now let's shine the spotlight on one last opportunity here, John, and then I'll vacate this space for a great leap forwards in terms of safety and perhaps also route development. Now this is a bit of a contentious issue. And actually, the former IATA director, Gausu Konata, always said, I am politely shouting here. I think Adefunke may remember those were his words. For the Swahili speakers in the room, they may know what the word Twaweza means. I'm very fortunate to be somewhat conversant in Swahili, but basically it means we can do it, we are capable of doing it. It's a research institution in Tanzania, which focuses on policy research. And they have actually looked into how the allowance system in Africa, the per diem, basically, about which we spoke on Monday, Sabine, how it distorts progress. In fact, they go one step further. They speak of capacity destruction instead of capacity building. And why? Because they've seen, and this was before President Magufuli actually came in office, they've seen that, and we've seen, I think, that current allowance systems often have very little relation to the actual costs of travel and meals and accommodation. And as a result of that, training abroad becomes a financial priority for many organizations and many individuals. And As a foundation, we're not here to assign blame. We're here to find a remedy. And we think partially this could be one of the opportunities, because this per diem system distracts from building up national training capabilities. So we are failing to build up national institutions that can do route development or safety promotion or any other area, because we're all focused on going somewhere else instead of doing it in our own country. It's an obstacle to getting large numbers of professionals into our industry, in any field, like I said, whether it's safety, operations, or route development. Now, of course, this doesn't mean we should do away with allowances altogether, but we have to move, just like Sabine had Sabine 2.0 this morning when her first effort failed due to technical issues, we have to move, perhaps, to allowances 2.0, which have a direct relation between the actual travel cost, so that it becomes less of an issue that people want to go abroad for training. And again, this is Gausu Konate shouting politely as well when he was the director of IATA for the regional office. Because once we go to this system, then the economic incentive for training abroad is minimized, and local safety training or training in general capacity is much more likely to be built. So, in resume, here are the 4 opportunities we would like to throw your way as a foundation. First of all, a PR campaign to bring the perception on safety in line with the facts on safety. Second opportunity, to work together on safety, maybe particularly on issues affecting the revenue. So I'm thinking of the bird strikes, I'm thinking of the ground damage, which directly impacts on the profitability of a route. Opportunity 3, we have to work at ways of motivating the cheetah generation beyond just salaries, give them career prospects, involve them in the organization. And opportunity 4 is enable safety training or training in general of much greater numbers of professionals by supporting the move to allowances 2.0. On that note, thank you very much.